Well, hello everyone. So excited to see you all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on the time zone that you are joining us from. Super excited for doing this last session, the third session in this APAC training series. I'm super excited to talk to you all once again, and we have an amazing speaker for this third session, Mr. Ganesh, who's going to join us in a while. But just before that, really love to welcome you all once again for this third session for APAC training series. Uh, Before we begin, quick few things for folks who have just joined in, and this is the first time that they're joining in. A quick intro about Neo4j. Well, it's a graph database and analytics company. The idea basically started. It was conceived on a flight to Mumbai. I'm in Mumbai right now. How great is that? When our CEO and co-founder Emil was traveling to IIT Mumbai for one of his research projects, and that's when this idea came to him. They started as an open source version, and then we evolved into an open core model. And this was way back in 2007 when the product and the company started. Well, I'm sure you all are excited for this amazing session that we're going to have today on knowledge graphs with ChatGPT. I am super excited for this one. This is one of the most awaited sessions for myself, and I'm sure for you as well. Do mention in the comment section how excited you are. I'm not sure where you're joining from: Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, or on our webinar platform. Just put in the comments, and I can see them all over here on how excited you are. And if you want to win this awesome Neo 4J t-shirt, show us your excitement on social media as well. So a simple thing, just go onto Twitter and tell us how excited you are for this session. Don't forget to tag me and Neo4j. I've mentioned the Twitter handles over there, and use the hashtag graphs are everywhere. Well, yes, the graphs are everywhere, and we'll see it in some time how knowledge graphs are also uh, coming into mainstream with ChatGPT. I'm sure everyone has somewhere or the other used ChatGPT in their life so far since its launch. Interestingly, I was reading this, not reading this, rather I saw this in one of the slides in our Graph Summit presentation yesterday. We had an amazing day yesterday, but um, that's for a later day. So it took just 2 months for ChatGPT to reach 100 million users, and there was a very nice uh, infographic of sort where it talked about, okay, how much is 100 million users in like quantifiable terms. So, for example, telephone took almost like 75 years to reach 100 million users, but ChatGPT took just 2 months to reach 100 million users. Such a great thing. And we're going to see how you can use ChatGPT and knowledge graphs together today. So, with this, I won't take too much of time and would like to bring Ganesh to the stream. Hi, Ganesh. How are you doing?
Morning. Very well. How are you?
Great. Super excited one.
Thank you. Same here.
Okay. So, I will let Ganesh do the talking. Requesting Ganesh to give a quick introduction of yourself before we begin, and then we can dive into the actual content which everyone is waiting for.
Thank you. Very quickly, I do cybersecurity for a living. Okay, and my introduction to ChatGPT and Neo4j was very incidental because I saw some very good books that I thought can be very well represented in the form of a graph database. And obviously, Neo4j, the community edition was free, and there was the Aura edition in the cloud as well. So I thought, why not try and use my boring NLP education to drive all the content into a Neo4j graph? That's how this all started. It has nothing to do with my job, by the way, and this is out of my personal interest that I figured that when you represent unstructured information in the form of a graph, okay, it generally makes for a much easier reading, which is obviously the reason we are here, right? And given that ChatGPT gives you the greatest convenience of pulling all that information, making a lot of good sense over that information, giving it to you in whatever form you can consume, I think it becomes a great candidate for accelerating somebody's push to a graph database.
Right.
So that's where it comes from. So hopefully the next so many minutes will be useful for everybody in terms of the examples that I can showcase in that regard.
I'm pretty sure about that. Let's hope your accidental encounter with Neo4j, uh, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How does it pan out with ChatGPT? Okay,
Thank you.
let me bring in your slides and then yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So my slides are visible, right?
Yes, they are.
Excellent.
You can get
So
started.
thank you. So I'm not going to introduce ChatGPT and Neo4j as much. I'm going to walk you through a couple of use cases that show you the relevance of using the large language model in different ways. Okay. On one side, you have loads of unstructured data. You're like the man in the middle. You're the intelligence behind structuring that unstructured data in the form of some sort of a schema or data in Neo4j. That's what we are going after here. The other thing that I noticed in the last so many months is you don't always need the greatest capabilities of ChatGPT to generate cipher queries. I will use the term large language model or ChatGPT in very mutually reusable ways, if you may, because the underlying model that generates all of this typically is something called text davinci 003, and you don't always need that. You could use a simpler model. You could use a model that is very code centric for your own use case, and so on and so forth. I'll possibly talk to you about that as well. And the last thing I will talk to you about is something called Langchain. I think this is the greatest disruption in the last 6 months since ChatGPT, wherein the ability for a lot of us to create apps using large language model is made possible because of the abstraction Langchain gives you. That's the convenience that it provides you. It allows you to do something called workflows. It allows you to create your own, it allows you to add a lot more context to your prompts. It allows you to remember the context of a conversation. It allows you to stitch your output to another input in the form of what it calls as chains, and so on and so forth. And that is very important. I'll hopefully leave you with that as we go towards the end of this conversation. Once again, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about what the large language model is by design. It is, for the purpose of this conversation, it's important for us to understand that 3 4 years ago, whenever some of us learned NLPs and the NLTKs, we were able to do semantic analysis. We were able to do, sentiment analysis. We were able to do simple things such as pulling the nouns, the verbs, some amount of meanings. We used to call something called as named entity recognition, part of speech tagging, and all of that stuff. Now, fast forward to the large model that OpenAI has trained on. The difference between the NLP that we were used to versus what this provided is just exponential, right? It was hugely different in terms of its capability, that you could make a very meaningful conversation with it, which is what obviously a lot of you would have seen when you chatted with ChatGPT, right? Now, that is the greatest reason why this becomes so much more relevant for fizzling unstructured data for preferably a graph schema. Once again, that's so much context that we can have in terms of moving forward. And another beautiful blog within Neo4j, which talks about how to move unstructured information to a meaningful graph in order that you're able to make more sense out of it. Once again, I don't want to reiterate the advantages of pushing unstructured data into the form of a graph, but just a small context. I'm sure all of you will get access to these slides. Another wonderful blog which talks about the relevance of finding the shortest distance between two apparently disconnected entities. For example, in my cybersecurity world, it's very important for me to know how difficult it is for somebody to exploit some sort of a vulnerability in your system. And there is something called the vector distance between where the exploit is versus where the actual vulnerability lies, and how can he go through that life cycle and all of that stuff. So this ability to represent information in the form of a logical graph, I think, will be useful in pretty much every other line of industry, wherever, whatever you do. Okay, so with that, I'll possibly jump into a slightly more interesting part of this demo. I will talk to you about a small article that I published on creating knowledge graphs with ChatGPT. In fact, even before that, this was part of my introduction to ChatGPT. Okay, so I took a couple of books, and what I started doing was started to find ways by which I could push the contents of the books in the form of a graph. Obviously, the user interface that you're seeing here is D3.js. I wanted to mimic what I saw in Neo4j on the web user interface. These days, I think you can do it with Bloom itself. And I can search for whatever benefits that those plants and those so-called treatments provided from the book. So basically, the content of the book where NLP learned, pushed into a graph database, and then you're seeing a web-based abstraction of that information. This is a little bit of context. Keep this in mind. And you also need to keep in mind that you don't need to always go to the ChatGPT console to start talking. You can also go to something called Playground, which gives you some more specifics and configurability in terms of the model that you want to use. This is what I was referring to. You don't always need the greatest of model to write code. You can write code with some of the other options that you see here as well. For example, Ada is very good with text. I think you can look for some more models that deal with code itself and so on, right? So this is a little bit of context in terms of what we are getting into from a demo standpoint. See, there are two areas that I wanted to talk about. One is there's a lot of textual information in my own security world where the control families, when you run a business in, I don't know, North America or some parts of the world, you'll have to comply with a lot of controls. Okay, so the NIST control families, as they call it, is a world of controls that has many different families. Okay, so when you run this, it's very difficult for me to go into a business. It's very difficult for me to go into a business and tell them that, hey, there are so many control families that you'll have to comply with. Thou shalt do it all. Becomes very messy, right? So given that situation, what I thought I will do is I will find a way to ask ChatGPT how to present it in the form of a graph so that it's easier for people to consume. So I can do something like, can you list down the controls in the axis within 800 SP. I'll have to be a little more specific. See, there's another thing that all of you will have to remember, which is the open nature of your query will lead to enormous amount of response which may not be very relevant. You'll have to get extremely specific about your query if you want to see. Look at this. I got so much information which possibly is useful in this case, but not always, right? So let's take, for example, I'm interested only in the technology controls. Okay, so I will say that, can you list only the technology controls within access? So it is able to pick up what are relevant from a technology standpoint. You don't have to, as a human being, do the reading in terms of, hey, this is process, this is technology, this is system, and all of that stuff. You don't necessarily need to do that. It is able to do that as well. And you can further say, when you create a cipher query to create the top 3 into a Neo4j database, I could do this as well. So it creates, see, once again, the immediate response is not necessarily relevant. So sometimes you'll have to say, create a cipher query on these lines. So you have to say something like, I'm looking for a query as specific as this. All this that I'm doing is under the concept of prompt engineering. See, now, once you start teaching what you want out of it, it starts to get a little more relevant in terms of the response it gives. It particularly says, hey, give me a control family name and return this and all of that stuff, right? Now, you can keep going on and on. You can also go further to the extent of saying that dissect this control family into the next level of subcontrols and give me a distribution or give me a wiring in terms of connecting them as either a tech control or a process control or a people control or something like that. All that is very possible. But I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that if you as the designer or the developer, you have to have a perspective on how you want to design this. Without that, this goes all over the place. So that's an important lesson, right? Another very cool use case that I saw in terms of wanting to narrate something, that do you know the boy who cried wolf story? The great thing about GPT is it's trained on information in enormous size across the world, right? Across the landscape. So it's got pretty much every other data that you think is relevant till 2021, at least this version that we are working with. Now, if you ask for the story, it obviously knows the story, but that's not what I want, right? I am interested in representing the story in a graph database that is easy for people to consume. So I'll have to say something like, I would like to create the notes first, the characters, boy, villagers, sheep, wolf. Do that, please. If you get very specific with this engine, it is able to create these characters for you. Okay, and you can say, can you add some interesting qualifiers to these characters, please? So it's boring, right? Just seeing boys and villagers and sheep and wolf is very boring. So you can further enhance your ask by saying that, oh, it gives a description for the boy and it identifies a few things as well. Now, once again, I go back to the human nature or the human expectation from this, right? So, how do you narrate a story? You can narrate the story only when you have a sequence associated with it. So, I further go and say that, hey, I would like to narrate this as a sequence. For example, once again, I'm short circuiting this in the interest of time. Talks about the events in the story. When you narrate all the events, sorry about that, in a sequence, please. So now look at the response, right? It is able to understand that I'm looking for a design where I'm not just putting the actors separately. I would like to marry a sequence to the events in the story, and it is able to give me something so much more relevant, right? Now, if I copy this and put it in Neo4j, I get something so much better. If you look at it, character. Now there is a story. Okay. Now still you don't know what happened when. Right now the story is tied between the actors, but you still don't know what happened when. So you can go back to that situation. You can go back to GPT and say, hey, GPT, I'm sorry about this. I'll hold this off for the moment. Now I can say, can you give me a query? Find out the sequence and sampling first. Now it makes so much more relevance, wherein I can copy this. It tries to get more imaginative. It says who did what first and second and so on, right? Now, if you go to Neo4j and paste the same query, you get the whole story. I'm hoping this is clear for everybody, right? So basically, we had a story where a boy cried wolf and he fooled the people around. And then the actual wolf came and the boy cried again. Nobody believed him. That's the story, right? Now, for you to narrate the story with a graph database, it's not just enough if you have the relationships. You also need to find a way to sequence it so that the audience can better understand. That's exactly what we have done here. Okay, I'm hoping this is clear, but once again, it all goes back to you as the designer knowing what you want out of this. Okay, so keep that in mind, please. Okay, so those were the first two things that I wanted to talk about. The first one was the NIST, and the second one was the boy crying wolf. Sid, if there are any questions I can take before I jump into the third use case. Would I know
Yes,
if there are any questions?
I don't think so. There's questions so far, but all good. I think there was just one on the name of the paper, which was primarily your article link. I sent that already
Oh,
in the chat window.
hey, thanks.
Yeah,
Now, the third
fine.
one, thank you. See, the
Yeah.
third one is very important. Anyone that's interested to creating a large language model app in 2023, which I'm hoping a lot of you are, will possibly come across one of these abstractions. And I think one of the best abstraction that happened lately is this particular ability to query a graph database as though you're talking to it. Okay. Now, this ability comes primarily from a engine called the Langchain. Now, I'll possibly go to the primary. This is the gentleman that wrote this article a couple of weeks ago called Thomas Britannic, wherein he spoke about the convenience of querying your own graph DB using simple natural language. That is what this is all about. And the reason why this library is extremely important is because if you have to write an app using either Neo4j data or anything that leverages LLM on one side and then also leverages the GraphDB on the other side, this is a great place to start. Okay, so please keep Langchain in mind. With that, we'll quickly jump into a demo wherein I'll bring my Visual Studio Code as well. Now, the beauty of this whole life cycle, as this shows as well. Hang on, I have so many screens open. Okay, so just for one moment, I'll show you the slideshow in terms of what it does. You as a user, you have an opportunity to make simple English queries on your own data. And the query is basically intercepted by Langchain's Cipher module, translates it into a bunch of Cipher queries, gets you the response, and does something very cool. It turns the response back into natural language and presents it back to you. That is what it does. So pretty simple flow if you ask me. And like everybody, I've got the standard movie database set up at Neo4j. So if you look at my Neo4j data, I've got the movie database. So the movie database, I'm sure a lot of you would have seen, is a collection of movies, collection of actors, a collection of relationships between the movies by way of who acted in what, who directed what, and so on, right? This is a standard Neo4j data. Now, if I tell Neo4j that, hey, play movie graph, Neo4j tells me a few things. Hey, there is Keanu Reeves, there is so and so, and all of that stuff, right? Find the actor name Tom Hanks. So I can say, run this query and say, it will find Tom Hanks for me. If I double click Tom Hanks, it does all this. Now, I would like to do the same thing from my code. Okay. Now, let's look at this, right? This is a very small piece of code. And the code is actually extremely simple. Okay. There is an abstraction of OpenAI that is offered by Langchain called Chat OpenAI, once again for conversational abilities. There is an important abstraction, particularly for the querying, that is offered by way of Graph Cipher QA chain. When you read up a little more on Langchain, you'll understand what the purpose of chain is. A chain is nothing but a workflow. Okay? It allows you to sequence a set of steps, and you can pass the output from one to another and basically complete your own life cycle for whatever you build your app for. And then, of course, I'm importing the Neo4j graph. Now, behind this, you need to remember that I have my OpenAI key set up in my system, which is the reason why this thing will work. Now I say, can you list all Keanu Reeves movies? It starts going into a conversational mode called the Graph QA chain, and it finds out the list of movies that Keanu Reeves acted in, and it gives you this response. In my view, this is one of the coolest things that you will see right now because it gives you already the convenience of talking to your graph database in simple natural language. Okay. Now you can even query accuracy permitting. You can even take this query here and say, hey, can you give this to me? These are the movies that this gentleman acted and whatever query that we wanted, right? So that's basically the agenda, your ability to basically query your own graph information in natural language, and more importantly, get a response in simple text is in my view, the greatest convenience of this library. Okay, I can ask a lot more questions. I can say that, hey, what else is here? Movies released in 1990s. Can you list the movies released in 1990s? Or I'll say after 1990. It gives you the list of movies. And you can even take this query, go to your Neo4j, hopefully it's syntactically right, and it gives you this exact information. Notice that the output is wantedly created in the form of text so that you can easily consume into whatever application or whatever program or life cycle that you wanted to create. See, there's something more you can do with this Langchain. In fact, there's an unending amount of possibilities you can do with Langchain. I created my own version of Avengers. I copied the story from Endgame. I started querying my own data on my own system. So you don't always need to depend on OpenAI as an engine on the other side. You can also query your own data. So in this case, I'm using the other example that I'm showing in front of my screen. I'm querying my own data in the form of asking questions, natural language questions, without sending my data to OpenAI. Now, that's a huge convenience for whatever enterprise use cases you may have. So, for example, I have, instead of asking Cypher queries, I can say, what are the two movies that I have captured in this story? Okay. You can look at this entire sequence. Obviously, the two movies that I copied from are Avengers Endgame and Dark Phoenix from that has X-Men. And the reason this is very cool is because you don't need to send your data all the way to an engine. The call to the LLM predictor, as they call it, or the call to actually creating indexes on your data. This is a very important function call. It basically creates what are called vector embeddings of your data. And you can either store it and query later, or you can basically query at runtime as well. So there is a huge convenience of not sharing your actual story over to the other side. You could create these vector embeddings and then use that to run the queries like I said here. I can even ask for a Cypher query like I had originally. Can you create Cypher queries on top actors in the Avengers? Takes a while. I'm using a model called Text DaVinci 003. As you can see here, it's possibly one of the best models you will see. I'm using it for the convenience of the wider knowledge base it is trained on. So see, look at this. I mean, the accuracy of the query is a different thing. It looks at, it says that you match an actor that has acted in this movie Endgame, and then return whatever in terms of roles as well as the number of roles and so on, right? But once again, I'm hoping everybody gets the essence of this, right? We're talking about having data at your own on-prem system, not having to send the data, but still be able to use ChatGPT or the large language model to creating Cypher queries on your data. You can even create a complete schema on your own data by using large language model this way. Sid, any questions before I go back to the presentation?
Let me check. Yes, there are three questions.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
I'll just bring them up. In this workflow, when does Langchain reach OpenAI ChatGPT APIs? In your demo, it
I
fetches data from U4J.
I will show that to you. That's a good question. In fact, I have it in the form of a. See, the StreamYard confuses me as to where my PowerPoint is. Okay, no PowerPoint. So bear with me. I'm new to all this streaming, guys. So I come from a different world, I guess. So to the question that was about how does Langchain fetch and at what point what information is shared, right? Typically, what happens is this is your knowledge base. Okay, this is the Avengers file that I had. When I made a query to, or rather, when I made a function call to create an index on my data, the OpenAI library creates embeddings of my data locally. Okay, you have two choices. At that point in time, you can either store the embeddings in the form of a vector database, or like I showed you, you can make calls live on that session itself, which is the example that I showed you. So long and short of it, the specific function call post instantiation of the OpenAI library, where I create the index, is when vector embeddings of my data are created locally. I'm hoping that answers it.
It does. Thank you. Moving to the next question. Apart from text to cipher, how can we leverage the intelligence of ChatGPT to existing knowledge graphs? And also, knowledge graphs is just connected data. It doesn't have the reasoning ability.
If you want to query existing knowledge graphs, you go with this alternative, the Neo Langchain demo that I showed you. Okay, so there is already a knowledge graph. You want to get content out of it. Like I'm asking questions on what are the movies released after 1990, where all Tom Hanks acted, where all Keanu Reeves acted, and so on, right? So this is exactly the answer to that question, wherein graph QA chain or graph cipher QA chain is the actual answer to that question. Gives you that convenience.
All right. And I think we have one more question. Could you give a hint as to how to combine both use cases, represent the context of a text, and then check which information is already present in your database?
Context of a text and represent what information
Uh,
is.
I think Guido, the person who asked, says that this question has already been answered, so we can actually skip
Oh,
this.
thank you.
Okay, cool. I think there are no more questions. We can move forward with the rest of the demo. This is
Hey,
going great.
thanks. Thank you. So once again, I didn't have too many more slides. I didn't want to bore you all with slides on a morning. So which is the reason why I put up this sort of a flow. So from a PowerPoint presentation standpoint, this is an important introduction that I wanted to leave you with, because I think you can create unending types of apps and whatever stories basis that. And I also wanted you to understand that the different models that are out there differ by way of the qualification they bring in terms of the indexes or whatever they can search and create embeddings, right? So, for example, GPT-4, I haven't used GPT-4 yet, I'm still trying to get access, is called multimodal, which means you can search between images and text, you can search across many different types of data at the same point in time, and so on, right? So, there is that convenience. There is the other perspective that I showed you, wherein on the playground, on this particular avatar that I showed you, if you have access to OpenAI or the GPT, you should also be able to get access to Playground. You have the convenience of doing a lot of prompt engineering learning by choosing the exact model that you want. What is the cost associated with interfacing with those models? Because there is the obviously you're going to pay for this whole thing by way of tokens, right? At the end of the day, this thing costs you by volume of tokens that you consume. So you can play around with a lot of these models for your own use cases to realize which model is right for whatever your use cases are. And pretty much the rest of the stuff I possibly have already spoken. This is a great time to be a developer, if you ask me, because you actually don't have to learn so much of ML as some of us used to. Okay, there's this huge convenience that Langchain gives you, wherein you can start using OpenAI as though it were some other simple library that you're using to create a workflow prompt and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that you should not learn ML. I think you still should. But I'm just saying the speed at which you can be a developer today, making use of both ChatGPT on one side and a GraphDB on the other side, is enormous at this point. Pretty much. So please find your own little app that you can create with the large language model and or a graph DB, and hopefully all of you have some takeaway in that regard here. I'll also leave you with a bunch of links. Sid, if you can post them. This is one of the best courses that I have seen to teaching me how to create these apps and so on. I'll obviously share with you the other links as well that I have used for some of this content.
Yes, and we are also gonna send in the like we can link the deck uh,
Yes, please.
in
You
the
can.
description. Let me just quickly paste this link in the chat window so that I don't forget. Uh,
Sure.
just do that. And meanwhile, folks keep on mentioning questions. I think there's one question that we can take up while I'm pasting these links in the chat window.
Sure.
This is by Matthias. He's asking when you are using Langchain, does it know which kinds of relationship and node types the given graph has? I have tried ChatGPT to make queries, but it hallucinates the types. That's a very nice question. I love this one.
See, it's a beautiful question, Matthias. It hallucinates because you are using generative AI. Okay. Go back to using Code DaVinci 002. Don't use Text DaVinci 002 like I showed you. Okay. Don't use this. This by default uses Text DaVinci 002, 003. Go back to using what are called instruction led models. An instruction led model hallucinates lesser. It goes strictly by your queries and answers and responds to those queries. Actually, what you asked is fantastic because this entire set of query that it generated, it does not always validate the name of the variable in my graph. It does not validate the name of the relationship in my graph. It does not seem to do all that. It seems to generate it on its own mind, right? So your point is very valid. If you want to cut down hallucination, there are two things that you have to do. One, look at the model. Two, reduce the concept of temperature. Okay. This important value or variable, temperature, keep it down to zero if you want to eliminate or reduce randomness. So I hope that answers, Matthias.
That's a great question. Thank you. Thanks, Matthias. And thanks, Ganesh. I think it answers. Uh, let's see if we have more questions in the chat window. All right, let me just go. Okay, there is one more question by TRK. Let us consider e-commerce example where Neo4j plays role in recommendations. If we integrate LangChain to Neo4j DB, what kind of value it brings in assuming we build a chatbot, which is basically knowledge graphs plus LangChain.
Integrate. Let me understand this. E-commerce where Neo4j plays the role in recommendations. Okay, in terms of what you should buy. I'm assuming a typical Amazon life cycle where hey, you bought a shirt, so why wouldn't you buy something around it? We integrate LangChain to Neo4j DB. What kind of value does it bring? In assuming we build a chatbot. It's a nice question. So if I were you, TRK, I will pass on the past data around this particular buyer's preferences. At the end of the day, the world works on personalization, right? Whether we like it or not, every search that we do, everything that we do is some way contributing to who you and I are, right? That information has to be first made available as your data. Okay, that's got to go back into preferably a graph DB or some sort of a structured or unstructured data store, which should then be used by GPT. Hold Langchain away for the moment. First, let's conceive the solution. In my view, the data that you want is the analytics around what makes this person, what makes his interest, what was he buying, what was his pattern, was it by amount greater than 5,000, 3,000, 2,000. All those parameters should have been in your database in terms of his personal preferences, and then you can send these preferences, or rather do use Langchain as the man in the middle to ask a query through GPT to say, hey, looking at this gentleman's preferences, what do you think I should recommend to him right now? And I think that's a good way to test the ability of the large language model on your own data for this individual.
Great. I hope this answers TRK.
Yeah, feel free because there's no end to your imagination, right?
Yeah.
You can want to use this for stocks. You can want to use this. See, at the end of the day, please remember the convenience of a large language model is in understanding semantics. For all else, you already have Elasticsearch, Pinecone, Neo4j. You have many different ways in which you can hold data and start querying. Your only reason for using ChatGPT is when I have typed my preferences in some other medium, say Facebook or whatever, and then you want to use that language to determine what this person would be interested in. Okay, that is when you make the best use of a large language model to understand semantics, if you may.
Great. Moving on to the next question by SciSeeker. He asks, can we leverage Neo4j as a vector store or engine for graph embedding search?
Good
Right.
question. I will give you the list of vector stores that are available right now. uh, The list of vector stores currently supported are the following. I have seen a lot of high quality search capability with Elasticsearch. Facebook has a way to search vector databases using Facebook AI semantic search. I think that is what FAISS stands for. You also have VV8, which is pretty good with text. If you had tabular data, you could, I think, choose Pinecone if I'm not wrong. Neo4j's index is not here. Uh, I don't know when that will get added, but this is your place to find out whether you can persist those embeddings in the form of vector stores that are allowed by Langchain today.
Yeah, I think that needs to be added. As far as I remember, there's someone who is already working on this,
Yes.
which I know of, but yeah, I'm not sure. Let me check on that. But that's a good one. Thank you for sharing it. Okay, there is one more question. Wow, there's a lot of questions. I love this. I love this session. If we have to host this integration, what's the role of Vortex AI since Neo4j has plugin in GCP?
What is the role of what Vertex AI as a
Vortex
plugin
AI.
in? I haven't used Vertex AI to actually honestly answer that. So if you talk about GCP, right? Uh, I use a lot of demos, as in I use Colab for a lot of my demos. Google Bard is actually like a mirror of GPT 3.5. Okay. So I'm sorry, I don't know Vertex AI enough to answer that question. But the exact sequence I showed you, whether I create cipher queries or whatever. In fact, Google is pretty good with creating those queries and code statements as well. You could use with Google Bard as well. But I'm sorry, I don't know Vertex AI to get more specific.
Yeah, I can just send in a link in the chat window. I know for sure there is some integrations that we launched recently with Google Cloud and Vortex AI. And that blog link basically tells you what kind of AI capabilities in Vortex AI is what an enterprise or like you as an org can kind of leverage, and you can use it. Let me just put this in the chat window over here.
Sure. Yeah, if
This
I'm in some sort of
process.
a group, I'll possibly read up and get back to you on this TRK. But yeah, I honestly haven't used this.
So one of them is, of course, you're leveraging natural language to interact with the knowledge graphs. Uh, when you're using Vertex AI, you can transform your unstructured data into knowledge graphs. That's another one. Vector embeddings, grounding with the knowledge graphs. So there are a bunch of them.
See, the other thing I will leave all of you with is Hugging Face, right? Please go here to learn the base models. Okay. This is possibly the best place to get a sense of the variety of models. Google may give it to you in a different avatar, Microsoft may give it to you in a different avatar. They're all fighting like crazy on this, right? It doesn't matter. We can be the simple people that go after models by way of how they are made available to you through Hugging Face, and then you can go to a Google or a Azure or a GitLab or whatever and create your integration.
Awesome. I think there is a follow-up question from SciSeeker on the graph embedding search, which he's asking that thing is we're already generating graph embedding with graph sage or hash gnn, so it would be ideal to have it. I don't know if it is a follow-up question or is it more of a comment.
See, the graph embeddings that you are creating with other alternatives today, there is a difference between those embeddings and the embeddings created using the LLM model. Okay. The traditional embeddings will allow you the convenience of doing regex search. It will allow you the convenience of searching very fast across unstructured data, or possibly give you some sort of a relationship between the data as well. That is different from the semantic search convenience that the LLM instantiation that I showed you gives you. That's the difference, right? If you can actually open up the JSON file or whatever that gets created out of these embeddings and actually look at it, I mean, the numbers don't show you much, but the fact that this is created in a slightly different manner will come to light when you start querying, is what I'm saying.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see if we have more questions. We'll wait for another minute to see if there are more
Sure.
questions. Okay, there is a question that's coming in by Lisa M. She's asking, what will be the difference on using Langchain with SQL DB instead with Neo4j for chatbot? Some pitfalls on using SQL. Nice, that's a good one.
Let me understand this, Lisa. What is the difference on using Langchain with SQL DB instead with Neo4j? For chatbot, some pitfalls on using SQL. Okay, so your choice of a SQL DB versus Neo4j is a separate one. Okay. Why would you go from a relational database to a graph DB is a separate question. You will do that if you want to show ontology, if you want to show the least distance between two vector points. There are a lot of reasons for choosing a graph DB over a SQL DB or a Neo4j over a SQL DB. That is a separate decision, Lisa. Okay. Keep that aside. And then for chatbot, depending on what decision you made, you can leverage the graph QA that I showed you as an example to start querying. So separate the problem is my best suggestion. Make the decision on whether SQL or Neo4j is appropriate for your problem statement first. Get your data and then use Langchain to start querying over it. I hope that answers it.
Yes, it does. That's very right. So I think that's a very right approach. First, understand whether you want to use a graph DB or a SQL DB, and then think of using Langchain over it, on top of it. Okay. This is a follow-on question from Sai Seeker. Do you see graphs as a new modality of to those multi-model pre-trained model? So we have like graph to image, graph to text, graph to audio.
New modality to those multimodal pre-trained model. It's a very it's a deep question in the sense uh, when we taught neural networks, right? This is, if I understand you correctly, you're asking whether the approach to storing the actual model information is ideal for graph to image, graph to text, graph to audio. Maybe. See, at the end of the day, a graph index slightly distinguishes itself from a vector index by way of its own mechanics, right? So I'm not able to blanket tell you whether this modality suits everything, graph to image, graph to text, graph to audio. I'm not able to answer that question. But I think if you go the next level and get some more meta information about either the image or the audio, for example, in my world, we go after something called attack composition analysis, wherein I go beyond text, audio, video, get additional meta information, and then try to use graph database for some relevance, right? So I'm sorry, the best answer is you'll have to go 2 or 3 more levels deeper to determine whether holding them in the form of a graph index is most ideal. So much I can think of, Sid.
Right.
You have better response, feel free.
Okay. I think Ganesh, there is some internet issue at your end. I'm not sure, is it my internet or is it yours? But yeah, anyways, I think it's fine now. It's back in a back on the same line. Do we have more questions? We have, I think, 10 more minutes before we wrap up, and we can take up any more questions, one or two more questions if there are any. Uh, I think, Lisa, we answered this question on what will be the difference on using OpenAI with SQLDB instead with Neo4j. For chatbot, some pitfalls on SQL, like query OpenAI with context and generating SQL query from OpenAI instead of Cypher. I think we did answer this already.
Correct.
All right. Okay. You can put in the questions in the chat window. Meanwhile, I'll just take a few minutes and talk about how you can continue your craft journey. This is the third session of this APAC series, the last one for this series that we are running in. We'll be back with this again, the series again, maybe different topics, different content, different speakers, sometime later in the year. But that's the last one. But if you still want to continue your journey, and I'm sure you would love to do that, your graph journey, you can take up these amazing free self-paced uh, hands-on online training courses on graphacademy.neo4j.com. And what's more is we have two free certifications that are specifically designed to test your knowledge on neo4j and graph data science. So do take it up. I'm sure you'll get certified. Send in your certificates online, tag us, and we'll be happy to share it further. Okay. The next one is on Notes 23. If you wish to share your projects, your work with us, I would love to invite you for this amazing conference that we are running in on October 26th. Submit your talks by June 30th. You can find the link for submission on dev.neo4j.com/notes 23 or scan in the QR code. Beginner, intermediate, advanced, whatever type of content that you want to submit, uh, we are more than open for any content. Okay, we also do a lot of in-person meetups and virtual meetups as well, and we have these graph database user groups to connect with passionate graphistas and meet in person mostly, and like build together, hack together, brainstorm on different solutions and topics, network with each other, and build a very strong open source graph community. If you wish to join any of our meetup group, go to meetup.com/pro/neo4j and find the one which is nearby to you and join this group so that you can stay updated on any meetups or events that's gonna be live in some time. And if you wish to speak at any of our meetups as well, you can submit this form. It's a very simple, tiny 2 minutes form. dev.neo4j.com/submit-your-talk, and we will get back to you. And trust me, this is how we got to know about Ganesh. Ganesh used this form as an opportunity. I'm not sure, Ganesh, where did you find this reference? I'm still trying to understand that. I never asked you on that actually.
I don't know. One of those mails, I think I posted a lot of questions when I created this, whatever sample. And one of those emails asked if I have something to talk. And I said, yeah, sure. And that is how this started. So,
Nice. This is great. This is great. Good thing it worked out for us and for you as well. But yes, we will love to hear your talks. Don't shy from the content that you're thinking of submitting. If you feel that it's too beginner, that's also okay. We are always welcoming any type of content, and we love to showcase your work to the world out there. So submit your talks, and we will contact you shortly. Also about the Ninja program, if you feel that you are a master of graphs and you have done something around graphs and has spent enough time with graphs and you feel that you can now move on to the next level, I would love to invite you for this Neo4j Ninja program. If you want to know more about this program, just go to this link, bit.ly/Neo4j Ninjas. Just make sure that the ends are case sensitive. Okay, that's the last one for the day. If you want to stay connected, if you at any point of time you have any queries around Neo4j around graphs, we have these two amazing platforms where you can posting your queries on Discord and Discords. Pick in any other platform, go in over there, submit your queries, and trust me, you get a very fast response by the community folks themselves. It's a very vibrant community on Discord and Discourse, and we keep a constant eye on the questions that are coming in and respond as soon as possible. So make use of it, and yeah, and we'll stay connected. uh, we have 5 more minutes. That's pretty much from my end for this one, but we can take a couple of more questions. I can see them coming in. Wow, this is great. There's one question by Shailen Kumar Dalbehera. Pardon me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. He's asking, could there be some way to enrich a query through the graph with the original source? Do you think it could add value in terms of info the graph might not contain and give better context?
It's a abstract question because you'll have to contextualize the question a little more. Could you enrich a query? I think you can, but at the end of the day, the data is not there in whatever form it's supposed to be there. See, the difficult queries in the world are, and once again, computationally difficult queries are group by, order by, ascending, descending, ranking, and all of those kind, right? If that is an example of enrichment, I'm guessing it's possible, but maybe I'll have to understand a little more about what is the data structure against which you want this enrichment to better respond. I'm sorry. Sid, if you have a better
Yeah,
response, feel free. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Shannon, if you want to add in more context, that would be helpful for us to answer it better. I hope this answers for now. Moving on to the next one, querying OpenAI with context and generating SQL query from OpenAI instead of Cypher. I think that's a part of the previous one, and it's been answered. Let's take up the next one by TRK. Will this Langchain helps in querying GDS algorithms? If not, do we have any fine-tuned technique? And what's the training data format to fine-tune on domain knowledge graphs?
Langchain is not meant to query GDS algorithms, if I'm not wrong. Okay. Langchain is an abstraction over the OpenAI library. Simple as that. Okay. Instead of you going directly to import OpenAI and writing queries, Langchain gives you the convenience of creating a query chain. It gives you the convenience of using different avatars in your prompt. It gives you the convenience of remembering context by way of giving you memory and all of that stuff, right? So what Langchain does is possibly slightly different from giving you a facade or an interface to GDS is my best response to that. So maybe I didn't follow the motive behind the question, but Langchain is an abstraction over OpenAI SDK. That is what it is.
Great. Cool. I think we are almost on time. Do we have more questions? Keep them coming in. We have 2 more minutes before we wrap this up, or rather, a minute before we wrap this up. But hopefully, TRK, if that answers your questions, that answer your question so far. If not, then also feel free to put it in the chat window that I mentioned. Sorry, in the community forum that I mentioned earlier. These are the community forums which you can leverage, and you can put your questions over there. Okay, I think it's time. Thank you so much, Ganesh, for doing this session. It was lovely talking to you, and trust me, it was one of the best sessions that I have done so far with the APAC. So thank you so much, and thank you, folks, for joining in for this one. And we will see you soon. Shortly, we will be back with this training series again, where we're going to start from beginner to intermediate to advanced, and then take you through the entire journey of how to move with graphs. Uh, and but till then, stay safe. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye bye. Cheers.